Welcome to The Learning Curve, the podcast where we talk about AI transformation and learning how to use AI in this new world that we're in. I'm Matt Sharp,
And I'm Holly Fake, and we're
and
here joined by Ethan.
Hi guys.
Ethan. We are very impressed with what you've been doing with AI, but the audience, could you let them know who you are and what you do here at Flexion?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Flexion, I'm a full stack engineer. I am currently working in GSA TTS, which is the Technology Transformation Services, and I have 20 years of experience under my belt. I've been an engineering manager. I've been a principal engineer. I've worked in SaaS. I've worked in public sector. I've worked in media and advertising. So that's a easy way or a long way, I guess, of saying that I've seen some things.
Yeah, so you've been an engineer for a while, and one of the reasons we want to bring you on is because you gave a flexil rate, which is a term here at Flexion that is like a brown bag or a lunch and learn, where you talked about how you were using AI to help your professional growth and kind of the direction you want to go and improve. Could you talk a little bit about that and then we can kind of go from there?
Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned, I've been an engineer for 20 years, and I kind of started to think, okay, so I've done all this stuff over the course of my career. I've worked on all these projects, but in terms of what I work on day to day, what is it that brings me joy? Right. So there's all these exercises that I was able to find online, as well as I hired a career coach last year to help me out with some of these things. And as a result of that, I got all this documentation from the career coach, from sessions I had with her, and homework assignments that she gave me. And I put that into an LLM, and I was able to extract some pretty cool things about my career, the direction I wanted to take, the things that I work on that make me happy, maybe where I'm putting energy that might not be the best use of my time. So just being able to work on more things to give me more fulfillment, I guess would be a good way of saying that.
I love that you used both the resources from an actual coach and then also you also leveraged AI. How would you say, like, how do those compare to you?
Yeah, so I guess also worth noting, I have a master's degree in education. So I've always been good at plotting the course for professional development. Um, so I've put myself through a lot of continuing education over the course of my career. But in terms of your question, Holly, the difference between the things that I worked on with the LLM versus the career coach, they differ because the LLM was more focused on the past and extracting patterns from the past. And then the career coach was helping me plot a course to the future. So, one thing that we've worked on was that I need to put myself out there more, which is, hi, why I'm talking to you guys today. Um, and then also, I spoke at a conference in Amsterdam last year for web performance optimization. That was incredibly cool. And I've submitted some additional calls for papers, calls for presentations this year. So that's all stuff that the career coach has encouraged me to do to get my name out there a little more.
But I want to hear about the car that they picked you up in.
All right. Yeah. So the conference was awesome. The conference is called Performance Now or Perf Now for short. Um, and they did a great job in terms of like the hospitality for the speakers. They picked me up from the airport, and there was a guy holding a sign with the iPad that had my name on it. So I definitely felt
Whoa.
legit. So they picked me up in a really nice car on the way there, but on the way back, so they picked me up from my Airbnb where I was staying, and it was a Mercedes S-Class chauffeur edition, which I guess in the Netherlands they make a chauffeur edition. Who knew, right? And I get in this thing and it has all kinds of buttons and switches. I wasn't in the car long enough to figure out what half that stuff does, but I did look it up and that car cost more than my first house. So it
Oh,
was pretty
no.
cool.
That sounds like an experience.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like thanks to your AI coach and your career coach, and now you're having great experiences like this. But I know you went to a conference, it was performance. Uh, I know you're heavy into performance. Um, let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So web performance optimization, I got into it. God, let's see. So I got into it back around 2010 and then took like a big long break. And I didn't really get into it more until around COVID. So I was working in the media industry at the time, and COVID happened, the pandemic happened, everything shut down. And along that same time frame, Google released a set of metrics called Core Web Vitals metrics. And there's three universal metrics that are important for sites to offer a good experience to their users. So there are three metrics that are meant to be universally applicable. And my company at the time, it was a bunch of like hobbyist and media sites. And around the pandemic, everybody was at home, so people were looking for things to do, right? So my company was like, we want to grow our audience. Let's think of ways that can help. And they gave me a little bit of agency to say, here's the things that I want to work on and I think would do us some good. And over the course of that, I took performance from like something at the company that no one had ever heard of to um, it showing up in slide decks 3 years later that were company wide presentations and presentations that I knew were going to go be given to the board of directors. So had a little bit of success there, just trying to figure things out on my own.
Before we
So
go too much further, just for the people that maybe don't know what you mean when you say performance, can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. So the way I like to explain things is the big three are largest contentful paint. In other words, it's how quickly does the largest thing show up on that screen? So you go to a page, and if you're on an e-commerce site, it's usually an image of the product itself, right? Like if you're on the product details page. That time is critical because you want to present the user with the information that they're looking for. And the theory is that the largest image or largest thing on the page is the most important. That's what the user came there to see. So that's number one. Number two is called, I'm going to stumble over the presentation or the pronunciation of this as I always do, cumulative layout shift or CLS. In other words, if you're on a site, and we've probably all had this experience, you're on a page and all of a sudden maybe an ad loads and you at the same time you go to click a button and you end up clicking the ad instead of the button. Things kind of move around. It's a stability metric. So it's like a physical slip in a digital space, basically. Makes things more error prone. So that's number two. And then the third one is called interaction to next paint, which is the hardest one to explain, but I shall give it my all. So, say for example, you are typing in a search field and the search field has auto suggest to complete your search term, and you notice that the cursor is like real laggy, maybe that the words don't appear as you're typing them in real quick. Well, oftentimes that's caused by some type of like analytics script or some other event that the browser is running. And that one has an extremely low threshold, which I can talk about a little bit and how I'm using AI to solve some of these things. So the threshold for a good experience for that is under 200 milliseconds, which is an incredibly short amount of time.
yeah,
And as a UXer, and Matt, sorry, I know you have a
yeah,
question, but
no
as a
worries.
UXer, I'm just so excited to hear about this because we know how important it is for things to load quickly. People will just bounce your site if it doesn't work that fast, right?
Absolutely. There's tons of correlation with web performance and UX, especially. I like to call the UXers my UX homies because we're just like, there's so much overlap between things that Holly, you might work on as a UX researcher. You're focused on time on task, for example, like that might be a metric. Well, if someone like me comes along and makes everything faster, that will reduce the time that someone spends trying to complete a task because they're able to move around a lot quicker. Or that CLS, cumulative layout shift, there we go, metric that I mentioned. Um, it's like if you're trying to click on something, you give the user a task to accomplish, and then things just start moving around the interface because it's not a stable interface. That can inflate, for example, user error rate. It can inflate user frustration because they're not clicking on the thing that they intended to click on. So all kinds of overlap there.
Yeah, I guess my question was similar, and you probably already answered. It's like, well, why from like why would users and UX people care about this? But you had mentioned before that this went all the way up to the board of directors. So that was my question. Was like, why would a board of directors care about performance?
Well, so there's always a correlation with things. So we like to say in web performance that performance is a proxy for other things. So in this case, for someone like board of directors, for it's a proxy for KPIs. So for example, the slower things are, the more likely people are to abandon their work. So for the media sites I was working on, they were supported by ads and they were supported by subscriptions. So the slower the site is, the fewer the pages that they look at, which means the less ads that we serve. Also, too, the slower the site is, the less likely they are to stick around to find out things about our content where they might want to subscribe. So there's all these. One of the most challenging parts actually is finding that correlation because I can give you the raw numbers all day long. Those are really easy to discover, but to actually correlate it to the business metrics that people might care about, marketing, sales, UX, executives, it's pretty challenging to do sometimes.
Yeah, so ultimately, all of these are correlations to, the bottom line, right? And so I think, I mean, I'm a personal fan of performance. I've spent a lot of my career in ML ops, which is all around the performance of AI and making it faster, which is itself is incredibly difficult thing to do. Obviously, in your world, performance of web pages and other things like that, how have these things come together? Like AI and performance, are they a match made in heaven? Can you just go and say, hey, make my website faster and AI does it? Or is it more complicated than that?
So that is a super interesting thing. There's a book that just came out. He's an engineer at Google. His name's Adi Osmani. That's the author. And the book title is Web Performance in the Age of AI. And what he wrote in that book is that LLMs, or AI, if you will, often will optimize for the correctness of the prompt and not necessarily for web performance. So we've seen this trend. There was a statistic posted by a performance engineer named Tim Kadlec, who works for Cloudflare. And he posted a stat that said that I want to say it was May of last year, that it was the quickest period of growth in terms of overall page weight um, in the last 2 years. So basically, what that means is that the LLMs, as people were starting to use agents and more AI-oriented workflows, they're writing more verbose code. So the page weight goes up, which means that things might be slower. It means that there's more risk of bugs. So there's this element here that I think is kind of an undiscovered risk for a lot of people in terms of using these tools that someone like me who's interested in web performance is really keeping an eye on how it's going.
So how are you keeping an eye on it?
So there's a database that is called the HTTP archive. And there is another database called the Chrome User Experience Report, or CRUX. And so that tracks how things are Progressing over time. So I want to say the last I looked, there's around 12 million-ish URLs in the HTTP archive. It's an incredibly large, but also wonderful resource for people who just want to like analyze data about websites at scale. So they release that every month, as well as the Chrome User Experience Report. So what that is if you use the Chrome browser, when you install it, you get a message that shows up like, hey, would you like to share some information to help improve your experience or whatever it says, right? Most people just click yes. um, and that information, it gets collected by Google. It's anonymized, but it goes into this large data set so it can see how real users experience the web. And then they use that as a mechanism, one for search ranking. It's part of their search ranking algorithm, as well as additional research of like where they might want to make optimizations to their browser to improve their product, to come out with these things that the browser engineers just kind of like put into a web browser that make it faster for anyone who uses the web.
That's so interesting because I feel like then it becomes a conversation of who's responsible. Is it the browser or the website sometimes?
Yeah, so it's kind of both, right? Like so anytime I love these types of optimizations where the browser engineers will put in a feature to a web browser and then like all of a sudden it just makes everything faster. Um, which it happens quite often. So they put in something that allows you to remember like the back button and forward button in your web browser. They put in something that as you're using the back button, it remembers the page in memory. So that way, as you're using the back button, it doesn't have to go back to the network. So if, to use that e-commerce example again, if, for example, we're on a page, I was just buying shoes recently. I bought some new kicks because, I needed some. But anyways,
Yeah.
like if you go to a site and you look at your category, right? So you have your product list page, you're searching for athletic shoes, right? So I'm like, I'll filter. I want athletic shoes. I like loud colors, so like don't give me like white or black. Like give me something funky. So I'll get that listing page and like I'll click the first shoe that looks nice to me, and maybe that's not the one for me. So I'll use the back button. And then I'll find another one, click another one. Maybe that's not the one, use the back button. So I'm going back and forth. And the way that browser engineers have done this, it's called the BF cache or back forward cache, is they just put this into the browser and it reduces friction for somebody who's following that back forward navigation pattern. Everybody can take advantage of it. But it just like kind of happened. And to give you an example, like I looked at Nike.com the other day, and Nike got around 15% of their navigations were from back forward cache navigations. So just from this optimization, browser engineers were able to make the web faster for 15% of the navigations that occur on a high traffic site like Nike.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
And it makes sense why, there's often browser wars and like everyone and nowadays there's so many browsers to choose from, right? Like no longer stuck on Netscape or Internet Explorer. We so
Yeah, so that's true, but most of them use the same rendering engine. So if you look at like Bing, or not Bing, Edge, Microsoft, my mind was Microsoft. So if you
sure,
look at
yeah.
Microsoft Edge, if you look at Chrome, if you look at Opera, they all use the same rendering engine. So Firefox has their own thing, and then so does Safari. Safari has their own thing, although on an iPhone, even if you install Chrome on an iPhone, this might not be the case anymore because I know there was like an antitrust lawsuit and I don't know where that is, but it was just like the Safari browser, but like Safari's rendering engine, but with a Chrome UI and extra
Interesting.
features. Yeah, it's a really interesting space. Um, but to answer the question of like what the user can do or what a developer like me can do, I can test things. As I have my CI/CD running, I can test things, I can run performance audits, I can implement these new things. So the way that features get into a browser, they often will pilot them in something called an origin trial. And you can opt into those. Like anybody can install a meta tag on their site to opt into an origin trial, try the new things, maybe discover stuff early and get ahead of the curve. And then I can implement those. And then some of the cool things I'm doing with AI and LLMs, which, well, I guess this is more ML, but doing a predictive model of if I have a change that is detected in CI, how is that going to affect things in the real world? Because CI is like a lab environment. It's like a clean room, repeatable conditions every time. When you get out in the real world, you have all these different people that are using different browsers, different network conditions, different geography, all of that stuff. So it's
And when you say CI, what do you mean?
so when it's basically an automated way of testing things in when I check in code, right? There's all these tests that run, there's all these automated checks that run. So there might be unit tests or functional tests, end-to-end tests, performance. I sound like I'm Bubba from Forrest Gump when he's describing the shrimp, but there's all these different types of tests that might run, as well as adherence to code quality standards. Um, and it's a way for us to, as we're trying to build software at scale, not have to test things manually every single time. So it's a layer of automation that makes sure that when we're checking things in and collaborating with a team, that it meets certain parameters for us. Like, is it good in terms of the tests? Like, did we have a regression that maybe nobody caught? Maybe we changed a line of code over here and it broke something over there, right? So that whole shebang there is called CI/CD.
So in the other direction, though, you started to talk about the real world. Let's talk about the real world and how it introduces a lot of problems. Because, yeah, like CI/CD is a nice clean room, a nice lab environment. But, like, what is so difficult about the real world when it comes to performance?
Uh, it's unpredictable, just like the real world in general. So, for example, um, I am currently talking to you on a very, very performant computer. Flexion spent good money on this machine. I have I want to say a 750 megabit per second connection for my internet. So I have a fast device, fast internet. If you're an engineer who has a similar type of setup, maybe you don't get a good representation of how a user might experience things. So one thing that's interesting to me is like, so I work in as a contractor for a federal government agency. And government is for everybody, right? So I wanted my websites and my applications to work in for people like me that have a fast computer, fast device, as well as somebody maybe in a rural area that has an older phone. You would be super surprised the types of devices that people are accessing these things on. Actually, a good source of that would be to go on analytics.usa.gov. You can actually see the devices that people were accessing US government websites on. And that Chrome user experience report site that I mentioned, that data set, I've seen people accessing internet site like websites on smart TVs. So like that is not one that I can tell you I regularly test or optimize for, but maybe there's somebody out there that's like, look, my phone broke, my I don't have a computer. I can't get to the library right now, and all I got is a smart TV. Entirely possible. So it's stuff like that. That, of course, is an extreme example. But if you went on like Amazon.com today and looked at the best selling devices, they have a public page for that. And I haven't looked recently, but anytime I do, it's usually like older refurbished phones. So it's not people that are buying, and that's a large retailer. It's very, I guess, a good data set to see what people are buying right now, right? So you have people
Yeah.
buying older refurbished phones right now. And maybe you might get like a flagship iPhone or a flagship Samsung in there or something, but consider the people that are buying those lower spec, medium tier phones. And when you buy a phone, that device is going to be in service for several years.
It sounds like there's just so much variability. So, what recommendations do you have for people when they're thinking about optimizing their websites?
Um, One is to test it because we have a saying that you can't improve what you don't measure.
Mhm.
So a lot of people, I think, make the mistake of going, "Oh yeah, our website's performant, our website's fast." So put things in, actually test it, and then if you do test it and you discover an issue, you have to prioritize it just like any other bug. So I think usually I always have to sell people on web performance. It's a lot of like, hey, I think we should work on this because here's the impact that it has. It's not as like usually celebratory as like a new feature. Like you launch a new feature, people were like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, look at this interface. It's beautiful. But if it doesn't perform well, then, that's not a good thing. So those performance issues and regressions need to be prioritized just like any other issue. And then when you debug things, prioritize those. So one thing that my career coach helped me with, I think, was where I'm most happy. And this is why this web performance stuff really matters to me, right? So where I'm most happy is when I can do the greatest good for the greatest number of people, right? So if I have a page that tons and tons of people use, that should be the one, if it's slow, that should be the one that gets addressed, right? So you use common sense to prioritize things. And you can use one of the things I'm also working on is doing a classification model with ML. So I have this clustering model that uses k-means and looks at performance data. And it's a really cool experiment with trying to figure out where that sweet spot is. Because I don't like optimizing things just for the sake of optimizing it. I really don't. I just want to, be empathetic, do good work, and make a web that's a little bit better than it was when I found it.
That's really inspirational. And I guess I think we wanted to spend a couple minutes having you share, if you wanted to, some of the clustering you've been doing.
Yeah, sure. So, can I show you actually real quick one thing? So you asked about testing here. I want to do like a little screen share thing. It'll be a micro lesson, right? So I
Yeah, let's
mentioned
go.
that shoe thing, me shopping for shoes. So we're gonna go shopping with Ethan right now, uh, and we are on this small little retailer called Zappos. And one way that I can use AI to do this. So one thing that people don't know, or I guess is a fairly recent addition, is that Chrome now ships Gemini models inside of their developer tools. So as long as you're signed in to a Google account, you can use AI assisted debugging. So if I open my developer tools, I can do that by pressing the escape key in Chrome. Um, and if the AI stuff is enabled, you'll see this little like blue caption bubble, like cartoon caption bubble here. So I can debug anything on a page with AI. I can ask any type of questions with it. And if I do this, so this is an issue. Remember that back forward navigation pattern that I mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
So I can say, I know the reason why that back forward navigation pattern on Zappos, it was actually broken and still is. Like they're doing something in their code that tells the browser, don't don't put this in that back forward cache. Don't make it eligible for that. So since I know what that is, I can ask questions of like to help me pinpoint where that issue might be. So there's a few issues going on with Zappos. One is it has an unload event on the uh, on the window object, which is oftentimes used for like analytics. So they might be tracking like if people navigate away from the site, they might be tracking like cart abandonment rate. That is an older way to do that technique, and it's very unreliable. And it also makes your site ineligible for that back forward cache. So I could say, for example, what is adding the unload event to the window object? And in this AI assistant, you have to opt in the very first time. It'll ask you if you want to enable it. But if I press enter here, it attaches that HTML element and we get this prompt here. So it says analyzing the prompt, checking window event listeners, searching for unload references in scripts and attributes, and then searching for that unload event usage. So then it gives me all this information here and it tells me why it matters. So it tells me, like I was explaining to you, the unload event is deprecated and prevents the browser from using the back forward cache, which significantly slows down navigation performance. Modern best practices suggest using page hide or visibility change instead. It's incredibly prescriptive in terms of that. So I think it's an excellent mechanism for people to be able to diagnose things who maybe don't have that baseline expertise already of like, why is this happening? How can I fix it? And that's a super cool way to do it because we didn't touch any code, right? Like we just pulled up this dev panel and asked a question. Um, and then it can give us like some follow up here. So maybe we want to ask a follow up question, maybe not. But I guarantee though that this ineligibility for back forward cache for Zappos is costing them money because it makes things just have a little bit more friction in terms of that browsing experience as someone's shopping for shoes. Makes it just a little harder to find what they're looking for.
Yeah, that's really cool. How you were able to kind of show this and just yeah, it's amazing how like when AI gets embedded into the tools we're all already using and there's not a whole lot of friction in how we use them. Like there's a performance there as well, right? Like, and so, you don't have to go off to ChatGPT and point it at the website and then ask all these questions where it'd have to do a web search and other things. You can just ask it right there in the web browser. So I love that. I love that that's even possible. I had no idea. So it's just so amazing how people are finding ways to kind of incorporate, AI tools into the systems we're using.
Yep.
And into the existing workflow, because I imagine you were using Chrome tools ahead of time, right? Like even before that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there, like I said, I've been doing this for 20 years. So when I first started doing performance investigation, as I mentioned, I got into it and then I got out of it for a while and then back into it. Well, when I first got into it, browsers didn't even really have developer tools built in. It was like an extension that you had to install. It was called Firebug for Firefox. So you had to install a browser extension to be able to debug things. I guess I'm old. I guess is the takeaway.
Wow. Awesome. So I think we're running up on time here, but Uh, Ethan, love to have you here. I think we have several different key takeaways. The first one, obviously, is hey, let's use AI and make our websites more performant websites. Ultimately they impact the bottom line. They make the user experience so much better. It's a win-win-win. Also, I loved your story about using AI as somewhat of a career coach, combining it with a traditional career coach and finding, it sounds like you learned a lot about where you want to go in your direction, what brought you most joy, what allowed you to kind of focus on these things, and you're already applying them into your career already. And so I love all of these takeaways, and I loved our conversation. So for those who have been listening, I hope you also enjoyed it as well as much as we did. Thanks for listening to The Learning Curve, and please like and subscribe. Thank you.